young Aussies see homeownership as a distant pipe dream, study finds. A new study has found that Gen Y Aussies are more optimistic than ever for the future, with one key exception. A new study has found that Gen Y Aussies are more optimistic than ever for the future, with one key exception. Yep, you guessed it. Housing affordability. The Institute of Public Affairs, a right-wing, free market think tank, has released a report into how young Australians feel about their future. The study included over 1,000 young people aged between 16 and 25, with respondents asked for their views on everything from democracy and freedom of speech to the economy. And, surprise, surprise, the country's ridiculously high property prices remain the big concern for the locked-out generation. The survey asked a total of 1,006 young Australians when they think they will be able to purchase their own home. Almost 75% of respondents do not believe they will be able to afford a house within the next decade. 62% of respondents do not see themselves owning a house by their 30s, and 12% do not believe they will ever be able to own their own home in Australia. Most respondents said they believe it will take up to 20 years for them to be able to purchase their first property, in other words, when they're as old as 45. 2% of respondents said they already own their own home, and a further 2% said they don't want to own a home. In a similar vein, the study found that most young people believe themselves to be worse off than their parents' generation. Only 25% believe they're actually doing better than their parents did, compared to 49% who said they have it more tough. Research would suggest their concerns are justified. Bankwest's latest first-time buyer deposit report, released last week, found it now takes an average Sydney couple more than 8 years to save up a deposit to buy a house. The report, entitled Australian First-Time Home Buyers Locked Out of Market, compared local incomes to house prices, which it used to calculate how long it would take for a couple to set aside 20% of their pre-tax income into a savings account to accumulate an average 20% deposit. In Sydney, where the average house price is now over $1 million, the magic number for a deposit is almost $215,000. That means there's been a deterioration of around 45% in first home buyer affordability to now. In Melbourne, that couple would take 6.2 years to save for a house deposit, with the average deposit figure at around $150,000. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, about a third of young childless people are still living with their parents, and that figure is rising. Meanwhile, the Australian Unity Wellbeing Index, released last week, found that adults in this living situation have seen their level of personal well-being drop to its lowest level in a decade. In other words, Gen Y Australians are both historically unhappy and utterly pessimistic about breaking out of that unhappiness by purchasing a home for at least another 10 to 20 years. $1.4 million for a burnt-down two-bedroom home, 10 minutes from Sydney's CBD. Bargain. pic.twitter.com HA6NPASY2Q. Yet the federal government doesn't seem to be in a hurry to address the issue. A 45-page report from the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Economics failed to include a single recommendation on affordable housing, implying housing affordability is not an issue. Other than pointing out that the rate of home ownership in Australia has fallen from 71% to 67% over the past 15 years, the government evidently felt no reason to address the issue. The opposition has called for negative gearing to be wound back, pointing out there is a national shortfall of housing and that rates of home ownership among 25 to 34-year-olds has fallen from 60% to 48% over the past 25 years. The Greens, meanwhile, bluntly said young people are getting screwed. In 1990, an average house was 6 times a young person's income, but by 2013 it had risen to 12 times their annual average pay, Adam Bant wrote on Facebook. It's simple. Young people are getting screwed, yet the government refuses to admit there's a problem. But other than housing, Aussie millennials actually do have a pretty good outlook on life. The IPA survey found that young Australians have a more entrepreneurial spirit, with the majority of them expressing an interest in starting their own business one day. 71% of millennials said they feel positive about their future overall, and 69% said they believe they will have a better standard of living a decade from now. The results also suggest the advancement of human rights and personal freedoms are high priorities for young people. Terrorism was voted the biggest fear for most millennials at 28%, followed closely by economic collapse and climate change at 24%.